Welcome to another first-person narrative tutorial video. I'm going to show you another twist on interactive objects today. So in order to show you what I'm going to make, I'm going to take a look at this version of the project that already has the feature implemented, just so you can kind of see what we're going to do here. So we're going to create a new twist on our interactive objects called a toggle set active. Let me actually fix this so it looks a little more decent in my editor window here. Alright, so we are going to make a new version of an interactive object that I've called toggle set active, just as an example of another thing we can do with our interactive object framework. You can think of this as almost like a switch. So when I click the switch, it will turn this off. So set active essentially just like turns game objects on and off. So if I turn that thing off, it's gone. Now right now you can see it's set to not be reusable, but that's just as simple as changing a checkbox in my toggle set active object here. So you will see if I make it reusable, there it goes. So anyway, this is what we're starting with. This is what we're going towards. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So this is the version, the work in progress version of the project, where you should effectively be starting from if you're following along. And we just have the interactive object here. And so the toggle set active is going to work kind of similarly to this, right? It should still, the player needs to be able to look at it and have the display text appear. When you press the interact button, it still needs to make the sound effect. So all that's the same, it's just extra stuff on top of that. So because they're so similar, I'm actually going to make my toggle set active be a child of the interactive object script. So in your scripts folder, go ahead and right click, go to the create menu and make a new C# script, and we will call it toggle set active. And go ahead and double click that to open it in Visual Studio. And while I'm thinking of it, before we start going to town on code, I want to just show you one thing really quickly. If you ever want to preview what toggling set active looks like, let's go ahead and make a new game object to put this script on. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-K, which is the Pro Builder object shortcut. But you could just get any game object you want. The easier to see this, the better. So I don't know, I'm gonna make something weird, a donut, I guess. I've got this donut, and I will build it. So here's my donut. Oops, I did not mean to do that. Close this guy, and maybe I will rotate it so I can see the donut a little better. And this is what happens when you toggle set active. It just makes it invisible. Now you wouldn't see that wireframe. That wireframe is just there when it's selected in Unity. So toggling set active, you can see the game object's grayed out when this is unchecked. When I toggle it back, it's visible. So toggle set active is, if you want to preview it, it's just unchecking the entire game object. So that's what's going to happen, except in a more automated way when I click this in script instead of me having to manually press it over and over in the editor. Alright, so back to my script. Now remember, I wanted toggle set active to be a child of interactive object. Now if you take a look, interactive object is a child of mono behavior, and it implements the iInteractive interface. So if I make toggle set active a child of interactive object, it's actually still deriving from mono behavior, because that's what interactive object derives from. and it's still implementing iInteractive because that's what interactive object implements. So we're sort of getting all of this stuff when we inherit from this one. So we will go ahead and get rid of mono behavior here and instead do interactive object. So a toggle set active is now a child of interactive object. An interactive object is a child of mono behavior and implements iInteractive. So because of this, we get a bunch of functionality for free. We get everything that this does for free. However, we need to do more than that, and we need to customize it a little. So first of all, in my toggle set active class, let's just kill start and update because that just is part of the template and we don't really need it. And what I'm going to do is create a serialized field, and it will be a variable for the object that we want to toggle. So it's going to be a private game object, and we'll call it object to toggle. Okay, and if I save that and go to the editor, I need to make sure I remember to put my toggle set active script on this new thing I made, this torus. You could have a cube, you could have anything, any model, or whatever game object you want. Just pick something that's easy to see so the effect is easy to notice. Put the script on there, and I want to point out that it is going to automatically set up my audio source because we have require component audio source. However, it doesn't have a sound effect yet. So let's go ahead and plug in the sound effect we want to use, which will just be the same one that we have been using. So we'll throw that in there. And if I play this, I think, oh, I actually heard play on awake is still on, so let's go ahead and turn that off too. So on your audio source, make sure play on awake is turned off. And in the toggle set active script, you should see a object to toggle because we just made that. So I guess I kind of thought about this backwards, but at this point I'm going to make this object right here is actually going to be our toggle set active object, which means it's essentially going to be a switch that will turn this one on and off. So anyway, let's go ahead and rename it before I get confused again. So let's call this one toggle set active, and it's just going to have this donut on it for some reason. And the object that I want it to toggle on and off will be the cube. So down here in its script, just drag the thing that you want to toggle on and off. So I'm going to toggle on and off this interactive object right here. Now that functionality isn't there yet, but we're getting close. The next thing I'm going to do to keep things nice and clear, I'm going to, on my toggle set active script, I'm going to change the display text to read toggle set active. So now when I run the game and look at it, it'll tell me that this is the toggle set active, and that's the interactive object. Okay, I'm going to kind of minimize some of this Pro Builder stuff just so it's easier to navigate this game object. I'm going to minimize the audio source component, just collapse it. It's still there, it's just taking up less space so I can see this easier. And I want to point out a way, again, to make life easier for the designer who has to figure out what this stuff means. So yeah, the names are pretty self-explanatory, and that's awesome, but just to be extra clear about it, we're going to add something called a tooltip. So if you take a look at the notes, you can find a link to the tooltip attribute here. And you can see what it's doing is it allows you as a programmer to specify a tooltip for a serialized field in the inspector window. So here's an example. When they mouse over health, it tells you the rules of how to use health. And this is what we're going to add to our toggle set active. So up above the serialized field, we're going to use the brackets and type tooltip for the tooltip attribute, and then inside of the parentheses we will pass in a string that we want the tooltip. Oops, I have a little typo. We're going to use a string to represent the tooltip we want to show whoever's using our script. So it's just going to say the game object to toggle. That's pretty cut and dry, but it's a neat feature that's pretty useful. And so now if I save and go back to this and let it compile and I mouse over, you can see I get my tooltip. So anytime as a programmer you think you might add a comment to explain what a serialized field does, so if you find yourself thinking, I better explain what this is, don't do that. Instead, go ahead and make that thought public for the designer to see also, so you can use the tooltip attribute instead. Now the tooltip attribute and using it is actually part of our Unity style and code conventions. So you can see when you do your code reviews, this is something you should look for. So if there's any kind of serialized field or editor field that you feel needs to be explained more, you would want to make a comment and say add a tooltip so that this is clear. Alright, so back in Unity, just a reminder, our toggle set active, when we actually click it, it's still just only doing exactly the same thing that our interactive object is doing. We've specified what object it ought to toggle, but when you click it, it has the exact same interact with method that the interactive object script has, and that's because it is inheriting that method. So remember, interactive object here implements IInteractive, which means it has to have an interact with function. If we look at our toggle set active, it's inheriting from interactive object, and because there's no overridden version of interact with, it's just using the exact same method that as it's defined in its parent class. So if we want to do something different in our toggle set active, we need to override the definition of this method in toggle set active. And there's a special keyword we have to give this method in order to do that. So the first part of overriding a method means you have to inherit from that parent object. So we are inheriting the method. The second step is to mark it as a virtual method. So public virtual void interact with. Now that I've done that, if I go back to toggle set active, I can actually define an interact with method. So public interact with public void. Actually, and there's one more trick to this. You have to mark it as override. So it's public override void interact with. So this is the syntax for overriding a parent's method in a child object. So you just remember you have to mark it virtual. So mark the method virtual in the parent, and then in the child you use the override keyword. All right, so let's go ahead and make a summary tag for this to sort of define what we want to do with this function so that we have a sort of clear goal. So we'll say that this needs to, it toggles the active self value for the object to toggle when the player interacts with this item. All right, so when you interact with this item, or this object, I guess maybe is a better word for it. When you interact with this object, it's going to toggle the active self value for the object to toggle. And so active self is just in code what it's called when you change this. I don't know why it's called that, but that's what it's called. And so now we just need to get that logic in place. So essentially we want to say object, so whenever you interact with this, we want to say object to toggle dot set active, and we want to set it to the opposite of whatever it used to be. So remember, it's that would be its active self value. So we want to set it to object to toggle dot active self. Now that would set it to whatever it already is. We want to set it to the opposite of whatever it already is. So that's what the not sign is. And so remember, object to toggle dot active self is just going to tell us true or false whether or not the object is currently visible or active, right? So this will come back as a true or false value, and we're going to actually set it to the opposite of whatever it actually is right now. That's what the exclamation point is, the not symbol. So we're going to set it to not whatever it already is, and that's going to give us our toggle functionality. Now that's great, except there's one more catch. We still would like to keep our sound effect and any other stuff, let's see, like this other logic that's happening here, we'd like to preserve all of that and then just do this on top of it. At least in this case, that's what I want to do. It's not required, but that's what I'd like in this case. So in order to sort of get all of this for free still, I can say base, which is going to refer to the parent class. So base dot interact with. So it'll just sort of call the parent's version of this method first, and then do our special additions. Now again, you don't need to do this. You may come up with a version of an interactive object where it doesn't make sense to do this, but in this case, I think it does. So I think if we just save this at this point, we'll get quite a bit of our functionality already. I'm going to make sure I save everything here because I changed this one too. And let's go back to Unity, and so I suspect now when I click this one, it'll toggle that one on and off. And let's just confirm that. So let's see what happens when I click it. There we go. So we're seemingly very close to having this done, but remember, we want to get that reusable functionality. So I wanted to add an is reusable bool here, so it would be like a checkbox. So maybe you want to have like a switch that can only be used once and then it's not reusable. So let's set that functionality up. So first of all, we have to let the designer decide what is going to be reusable and what's not. So we'll make it a serialized field, private bool is reusable. Reusable, there we go. I think I spelled that right. And we should go ahead and give it a default value. Let's say by default that the object actually is reusable. And we can actually give this thing a tooltip too, just to make it super clear, right? So tooltip, what's this thing for? can the player interact with this more than once? That's a pretty good tooltip. And so just to see what that looks like in the editor, just go ahead and save, Alt-Tab back over, and when I click it, now I have this is reusable. Can the player interact with this more than once? Yes would be checked, no would be unchecked. So now let's set the rest of the logic up in code. So go to your toggle set active script, and basically we're going to say if is reusable. I don't know why that's not showing up. Oh, what happened here? Oops, I actually made a mistake here and I added that code to my interactive object. So we're going to go ahead and just cut all of this out of interactive object. That was my mistake, sorry. And we want to actually put that code here. My mistake, save that. Okay, sorry, toggle set active is where is reusable ought to be. Do not have is reusable in interactive object, that's not where we want it. Alright, so move that over here, and now inside of my interact with function I can add an if statement and check if is reusable. Then I want to do all this stuff, definitely. So we'll select all this, hold Alt and hit the up arrow, and then hit Tab to move it back to the right spot. I can hold Control and use the arrow keys to skip to the next word. So if you need to like go all the way to the left side of the margin and then hit backspace, so everything is all nice and lined up. So if this is reusable, I want to do the logic. Or if the player has never interacted with it. So if it's not reusable but you've never interacted with it, you still want to be able to do it at least once. So we need to make another variable to track that. So we'll just create private. It doesn't need to be, it should not be exposed to the editor. So private bool has been used equals false. So initialize this one as false. So the object will start off it's never been used. So if it's reusable or it has not been used, so if reusable or not has been used, do the stuff. But there's one more thing we need to make sure we remember here, and that is to say that has been used equals true now. Once we've done this, it's been used. So next time through when the player clicks it, we will skip over this because it's, unless it's marked as reusable. Alright, so save everything. Let's test that out. Go to Unity, give it a second to compile, select your toggle set active, and we know reusable works. Let's uncheck reusable. Now it should only be used once. And yeah, I think it'll work, but it'll show us an interesting issue we're going to have to work through. So toggle set active, I'll click it, and it's gone. And now it is not reusable. That's great, except even though it's not reusable, I'm still getting the text. And that's misleading. If I'm the player and I see that text show up, I think I ought to be able to do it. So why don't we actually rename the text or rewrite the text so that it's more clear. So we'll say we'll say toggle the cube. And now when I play the game and look at that, it'll say toggle the cube. And if I click, it goes away. But it still says toggle the cube, but clicking does nothing. So I find that misleading as a player. So we have to actually figure out how to make the text change when you have used a non-reusable toggle set active object like this. So maybe our first thought is, okay, I know how to deal with that. Once you've used the object, we will say if not reusable display text equals string dot empty. Now, a couple things. Let's see here. First of all, display text can't be accessed from here, which is confusing because, well, let's see. If you click this, if you click display text, so the cursor's over it, and then you press F12, it'll go to the definition. Or you could right click and select go to definition. So how come we can't change the value of that? It's because this is a read-only property. There's only a getter. And so that means we can't set it from outside the class. So really we need to change the value of this. And there's a way we can do that. We can expose that so that it's only accessible to children of our class. And so that's just a different access modifier. So rather than private, we're going to actually make this protected. And protected just means that only children and the class itself have access to it. So now, rather than trying to change this read-only property, we should be able to pick up the display text with the lowercase d, which, if you remember, the property, which is what's visible outside the class because it's public, is just sending back the value of this field here. So if we can change this, we're effectively changing that. So anyhow, making it protected allows this derived class, this child class, access to it. But no outside classes could get it. And that's what we want. We want to use the minimum amount of access that's required for the job in question. And in this case, it's protected. Now, I should also point out that when you have an if statement with only one line, you can do something like this. So in other words, if you look at this if statement, this condition is governing whether or not all of the lines of code inside these curly brackets get executed or not. But since I only need this condition to govern this single statement, I can opt to not use the curly brackets. So it's fine to use the curly brackets if you like that and that's more clear to you. This is exactly the same. Also, if there's only one line that needs to be governed by that condition, you can do it like this too. You can write it just like that, and that's fine too. But because this is so short, and I wouldn't use this a lot, but because it's so short, I'm actually going to go ahead and write it like this because I think this kind of reads clearly. It's like a sentence. If it's not reusable, the display text equals string.empty. So anyway, now that we can actually write this and it will compile, let's go see what it does. So if you interact with it and it's not reusable, we want to change the display text to just say nothing so that it will not act like I can reuse it again. Let's see what that does in practice. Let me just make sure I saved everything. I actually failed to save everything. So make sure you save everything. Go back to Unity. Run the game, which takes a sec to compile. And okay, so should I toggle the cube? Sure, let's do it. I click it, and it actually seems like it worked. So that's pretty cool. Let me try one more thing, because I actually didn't expect it to work. Alright, so I'm going to run the game. Let's just double check this. Wow, okay. Alright, well, when I implemented this in my other project, it did not work so smoothly, and I had to actually add a little bit more logic to get that to work. And I'm not sure what I did differently, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go with it. But let's just add one more toggle set active and just make sure everything is working for us. And then I'll be able to sleep easy tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and add another cube. Control Shift K. And let's just go through the setup process for this again. So I got my cube. I want to add a toggle set active component to it, or just drag the toggle set active script onto it. Because of our require component attribute, it's automatically going to also add this audio source. Remember the require component attribute. Alright, so I've got the audio source, but it does not have a clip assigned yet. So let's go ahead and drag our audio clip in there. And remember, we don't want this thing to play on awake. Now, do you want to never do that setup again next time you make a toggle set active object? Well, let's make it a prefab. So let's call this one toggle set active donut. Oops, I have caps lock on, I guess. And I don't know why I put a underscore. There we go. Toggle set active donut. This one will just be toggle set active. And I'm not going to call it cube. I'm going to leave it named like this because I'm going to use this one to make my prefab. And I want my prefab to just be called toggle set active. And so I will get my prefabs folder open in the project window and drag this sucker down there. And so now next time I want to make a toggle set active, I can just drag this in and you will see the sound audio source and the sound clip are already ready to go. So there we go. Anyway, let's go ahead and test the rest of this stuff. So I will leave this one reusable, and it will go ahead and toggle the donut. So let's find the donut and put it in here. And we will change the text to toggle donut. And let's go ahead and make this one toggle, I don't know, we'll go ahead and make this one toggle the donut also, sure. But we'll make it not reusable. We will say toggle donut only once. Okay. And let's just try our stuff out and see how things go. So first of all, we have our regular interactive object. Does nothing except make a sound effect. We have the toggle donut. Works over and over. We have the toggle donut only once. And you cannot do it anymore. Luckily I have this one. And then finally we can toggle the cube. So things seem to be working, and you can start to see some of the possibilities of this framework. There are lots of things you can do with this interactive object setup we have. You can make switches. You can make, eventually we're going to make a door. I'll cover that in another video. We can just turn things on and off. We can trigger things. So hopefully this starts to give you some ideas. I mean, as I just put this test together, it makes me wonder if you could make some kind of weird puzzle out of just turning these on and off. So anyhow, I'm going to leave this video here, and next up, I guess we will start working on doors.